I'm looking forward to chill after this. Hey, it seems like we're live.
Yes, I think it still needs a millisecond, but it's loading, and I think it seems like we're live.
I think so because it says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. Good evening, everybody, on this beautiful Thursday. Some of you are probably just finishing up work, and before you get in the real chill mode, it is up to us to enlighten you with some talk about Europe. We are Volt, the pan-European political movement, and these are interesting and important times for Europe. That's why we decided to host this live event tonight. And my name is Reinier. I am one of the co-presidents of Volt Europe, and I'm gathered today with Damian and Federica. Would you like to introduce yourself first, Fede?
Yeah, of course. So hi, everyone. My name is Federica. I'm the co-president of Volt Italia. So I've been re-elected co-president in October last year, so 2019. Thank you very much, guys, for inviting me. And today I will basically I'm gonna give an overview of what Italy and Volt Italia as well think about the recovery fund that has been proposed by the Commission. And again, it's, as I said you before, starting the Facebook Live, it's really nice to see you guys. And I'm really looking forward to enjoy with you this time to discuss a little bit what's looking for us.
Thanks. I'm happy to see you too again. Damian?
Yeah, I'm Damien. I'm the only, sadly, Volt MEP in the European Parliament, and I work in the Budgetary Committee as well as being the spokesperson of the Green Group in the Constitution Committee. So, I mean, everything that happened yesterday and today as well is obviously extremly interesting for me, and I think it's definitely worth discussing this. And you have to stop me if I get too technical, because in the last 2 days I read the regulations and papers about the details of these instruments and so on. So I might get lost in words. And so, yeah, stop me if that happens.
We'll stop you if it happens. Yes, and I can imagine why it would happen, because these are very complicated topics. If you look at what happened over the past months, then of course the Corona crisis hit. We had to get our entire continent in lockdowns. And because of that, our economy faces immense negative consequences. And in order to tackle that and come out of this crisis stronger than before, we have to come with European solutions. And it seemed like, as you've probably noticed in the past, there was fights between countries of how to move forward. But then last week, suddenly, the French and German government came together with a new proposal that was pretty groundbreaking, because they want to have a 500 billion euro grant. Immediately after that, there was the so-called frugal four, or the stingy four, you can also call them, four smaller countries, including the Netherlands, where I'm also from, the Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, and Sweden, that decided to come up with a plan that was entirely different and didn't want to grant money, but loan money. And then yesterday, the European Commission came with their proposal. And I think before Damien explains what that proposal is, I'm curious, Fede, what was the reaction like in Italy and the public debates when the so-called frugal four came with their counter proposal?
So that's like, that was going to be my question to you. What did you think about your own government and what they were proposing in while, here we were kind of suffering to see Europe kind of biting each other. So yeah, like the initial reaction was obviously negative. And I was like super skeptical as well, especially in the beginning, because I just want to remind you that, and maybe Damian, maybe you don't agree, I don't know, I'm really curious to know about you as well. But the initial response of the European Union, of the Commission, of the BCE, of the ECB, was not positive at all. If you think about the first initial reaction at the beginning of March, we were not seeing a response that at least us, Italy, as a hugely affected country, we wanted to see. And so we had, first of all, a European Commission and European institutions that were not really eager to understand the depth of this crisis and like to take us seriously in a certain sense. And then we saw the Frugal Four also going against the basic idea of solidarity, right? And what we thought in the beginning was that, at least what I thought was that on this ground, on this crisis was where the European Union was going to make it or break it. I was a little bit disappointed with the European Union response, with the Frugal Four response as well, even because it's also a matter, it's not only a matter of solidarity, but it's a matter of mutual gains and understanding. So I really couldn't understand why there was such a huge block from these countries. And I'm a little bit afraid, but I'd like to have your opinion as well, that there's still going to be a little bit of frictions. I mean, hopefully a little bit, but maybe more than a little bit of frictions, especially now the funds of this recovery funds will have to be allocated, starting from the proposal done from the Commission, because from what I've heard, but maybe Damian knows more about it, the Frugal Four will still have some doubts about the amount of grants that have been proposed and the way in which those money are going to be allocated to the different countries. But yeah, having said that, I have to say that this proposal, I mean, when I saw this proposal yesterday, it changed my day, and it hopefully gave me back hope on the fact that we can actually make Europe now. But tell me, you guys, what, like Reinier, what did you think about your country and the Frugal Four when they came? How did you justify it?
Well, I think that what's good to know to start out with that is that I disagree with the proposal by the Frugal Four, and the country presidents of Volt Austria, Volt Denmark, Volt Netherlands, and Volt Sweden combined made a statement on why they disapprove of their proposal and how it should be different. But what could be interesting is to try to give you an insight in how some of the people on the street or average people in the Netherlands think. So because the general sentiment is that people back the government's stance. And the interesting thing is that there is quite little debate within the Netherlands about whether that stance is correct or not. If the government takes a stance on something that has a national impact, you tend to hear a lot of different views, like a rainbow, an entire palette of different views on that matter. But when it comes to their stance in Europe, you hear it very little. Then on the right-hand side, we have this populistic party called Forum for Democracy, who are very much anti-Europe and don't want to invest into countering climate change. And they have grown immensely. They're one of the biggest political parties in terms of members now in the Netherlands. And because they have gotten so big, they are a danger for the Christian Democrats and the Liberal Party, who think that if we now give money to the Southern European countries, the voter in our elections next year will cut us out and will support the party that is even stronger and more negative about the EU. What we hear very little is actually we benefit from a cheaper euro because we can export more. We are one of the countries that benefits most from the internal market. But those voices and those things you hear very little. What you also hear very little is that we give tax grants to multinational companies that make you lose tax money. And but what you do here is we have a good government, we have public richness, but we have poor private people. And in Italy, the average private person is a lot richer than we are, only the government is poor. And they have a large black economy. And if you would actually collect taxes in a proper way, then they would be able to fill the hole in their budget. And in the past 10 years, we have downed our public debt, but yours has actually gone up. So why should we pay for the lack of being able to handle your own country that you displayed? That's the vibe of an average person on the street. And I don't agree with it, but to try to share that perspective.
How does that, I mean, Fede, how do you feel about that if somebody says that? Like Italians are so rich and the state is just badly managed. I mean, how do you react?
So first of all, the common perception, it's super interesting what Reinier said, because the common perception from our side is that the individual is not rich at all, and that the state has abandoned him. Even if you think about many of the state policies that have been done in the last year, especially, they have been like supporting in a certain sense without investing. It's been free support in a certain way, with like a sort of UBI, which is called the Reddito di Cittadinanza. So it's like a citizenship grant or something like this. So even though the state has been kind of supporting single people, the impression that we have is that we are not rich at all, and that we are abandoned generally by the state. But because then on the other side, we spend a lot, but the money that we spend, and we have lots of taxes as well, but the money that we spend are not really implemented properly. But then it was interesting that like we had the entire opposite discourse going on in our country, because while on your countries you were saying, but why should we pay for this mismanagement of those country's money? We were saying, oh, but you know, what's the point of being in the European Union when the moment to show that we are a union and that we have solidarity, then no one is actually helping us around and we are left by ourselves. And you could really sense it and feel it. There was a huge Euroscepticism, especially in the beginning, because then you had also the sort of a bad image that you attach to our countries. So like, oh, but Italians tend to exaggerate, or then, oh, but Italians, they don't have a good healthcare system. That's why they're in this big mess. And it was such a huge misconception, because the regions in which the coronavirus started are among the richest region in Europe, with the best healthcare system in Europe. But what we heard from Europe was, you guys, you're always the same. You guys are, you have a horrible healthcare system. You don't know how to spend your money. So this like started to create a huge amount of Euroscepticism.
And the interesting thing is, it is not the first time, because during the migration crisis, Italy consequently asked for help. And then our prime minister said, well, we're not going to help out. And yeah, sorry, you're just geographically unlucky. I mean, that's as if you're in a...
As if it was something that we could decide, you know?
Yeah, and I compared it today to, imagine that you're a football team. You're going to say, okay, we're going to be a team and we're going to do this stuff together. And then the Netherlands is the striker. They get a cross pass. They can score a goal. They can profit from it. And then the same person that just enabled them to score a goal asks, okay, do you now want to defend with me because we're under attack? And all you get is a middle finger. And I think that these things are not said often enough in the Netherlands. So that's why a lot of people only get a one-sided view. And that's why I think, so that combined with the election next year, where the anti-European party has the potential to become very big, those two things combined, I think will make the Dutch government still be very reluctant to go with the proposal from the European Commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think you both said like a range of super interesting things. Like what you said, Reinier, about the fact that people don't even know how to debate these issues so much because they seem complex, and somehow like the EU and like national media really influences completely what people think on these issues, because it's somehow the direct democratic access to these topics seems too far. It seems to be too difficult. Yeah. And I think that's again this issue that we see as bold everywhere, that the national dialogue is much too focused, much too centralized on the national level, and it's not really connected to what's going on in the EU.
And that's exactly why we're going to participate in the national elections as Volt next year. We're going to choose our lead candidates on the 6th of June. Yeah, and we have some really good and talented people.
It's a good time to show your beard, Damien.
Yeah, it's been a long day, so...
sorry for that, but
I'm the only one having a beer. But we're going to elect our top candidates, and there's some super talented people. And I think that once we are in the national government, we can actually make way more noise on bringing that European perspective in.
Yeah, I think it's crucial, because even if you think about us, Guy, like like, do you remember when we were working in Volt at the very beginning of this crisis? I remember we were in the VCR and we were discussing with the different president of the different countries. And we, who are extremely educated, we speak English, we have access to different kind of news. We had different ideas of how the crisis was hard on different countries and how it had to be handled, just because there's no European media, there's no European view, there's no possibility of getting access to news that are actually, you know, neutral and not country mind binded. So I think that then here we should also work as a party to express this kind of neutral way, which is super hard even for ourselves, because we have to get out of our national outlook, which generally it's what we deal with, and discuss in truly European terms. So I think it's like events like the one we're doing right now are great to get this kind of outlook.
The second thing that I thought about, and that's also connected to what you just said, is, you know, I mean, it should also be fine for Reinier to say, I want money to be spent correctly, or even Fede to say, I want money to be spent usefully. And Reinier saying like, no, it's about spending it as much, because that's a political debate, you know, like you could say, I want it to be on green and I want it to be on digital or whatever, or like whatever you think, or, you know, only on reforms and so on, but it's always mixed with this national level. So if it wasn't Kurz, but, you know, like a part of the European Parliament standing for more frugal policies, and if it was, I don't know, like another part that would say that we need to spend much more, which is also the same debate that we all have in our countries, and then you could elect at some point these, you know, the one side, and the other, the next time you elect the other side because it didn't work or whatever, that would be a healthy political process. But since like these two sides are now enshrined in national positions and they all have veto power, that is what actually fucks up the process, you know?
And that's why we with Volt strive for one Europe with one democracy, because that would solve that.
True.
That's correct.
But do you guys think that, so one of the proposals of the new commission proposal is to get some kind of Europe-wide taxes, right? We have, like as Volt, we've been advocated for a carbon tax adjusted, or for a web tax, or a multinational tax, European-wise. Do you think that if this proposal gets accepted, this is going to be a good point from which we as Volt, but especially we as Europe, could start thinking in European terms, prejudice aside, nation aside, country aside, and really think about how can we raise money and use them efficiently?
Yeah, maybe if okay for you, Reinier, I can quickly go on jump on that, because there's, I mean, just maybe for also the listeners of what this EU proposal was that happened yesterday, I think that's also helpful. I mean, basically, what happened is that the Corona crisis hit, then we really didn't manage well on coordinating our health response. Italy was one of the countries suffering from that. Then we got a bit better on that, but still, I mean, in the first moment, I think we really failed. And then the economic response, like the economic crisis came, and it was clear that the heads of state wanted to somehow find an agreement on how to respond to that. They didn't manage to agree on anything, basically. And then they said, okay, how about you, European Commission, you make a proposal on what we could do. And then the European Commission worked on something behind closed doors, and then probably didn't really feel that the political, let's say, basis was there. And so they asked the French and the Germans, or somehow, at least it happened that the French and the Germans went forward with a big proposal and said, we want to spend 500 billion in grants across the EU, which is actually, and actually would borrow from the open markets to finance it. And that's, I mean, was already a huge step. Yeah.
Before you continue, there's one thing that I find so interesting about the stance of the Dutch government and the other frugal four, is that you would expect that in this globalizing world, small states have a lot less to say if they're by themselves than the bigger states. So I think that if it really comes down to it, Germany and France would still be able to play an important role in the global, on a global scale, because they are by themselves big enough. But that's not the case for Sweden, Denmark, Austria, and the Netherlands. So what I would expect is to this push for a deepening of the EU would come from those smaller countries because they benefit from it more. But the contrary is the case. Actually, that push comes from the two biggest countries.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with the fact that Germany could make it alone. I think that's not true. I think the Germans have also, at least now in the government, apparently understood that, and I think also, to be honest, throughout our history, that Germany would not be successful, and that it would lead to extreme tensions if, outside of the European Union, Germany would try to get along in the
yeah,
in
that's true.
global
That's
economy.
even Merkel said it with the nation so alone has no future. But I think they would have more of a future than the smaller ones.
Maybe. I mean, 70% of our export goes to the EU. Yeah. So I mean, it's just to show how dependent we are as the export champion of the world. Yeah?
But it is true that Germany could actually played a super important role in this whole crisis, because if Germany at one point decided just to go with the frugal four, probably we wouldn't have this kind of position and we wouldn't have this kind of plan. And I think that I still remember it was like a month ago when there was like the in between the first commission proposal and this second one, where, Germany was still not sure whether it wanted to go for grants or it wanted to sustain the proposal, like the more rigid proposal. And I remember talking about the role that Angela Merkel could have played in this game, because if she just decided to go, let's say, in the wrong side, probably this would have like broke the European Union as we know it. So I think that it's a huge responsibility on her side, even because it probably goes against, but then this, maybe you tell me better, against the common understanding of even the German people to subsidize such a huge amount of money to southern countries, considering also their behavior in the previous economic crisis. And I really think that it was a responsible act, let's say so, because maybe her government realized that going with France and making such a plan, supporting the European Union, would have kept the European Union alive. Otherwise, I don't think that, guys, we would have still be here talking right now. What do you think?
I mean, you're completely right. Yeah, it's just interesting because we have had her for so long. She already had these chances to do this, presented to her quite some times. Like she was already there in the financial crisis. She was already there in the migration crisis, and she did something there. But especially in the financial crisis, I mean, she said that Corona bonds and common debt is, you could say, nothing else than Corona bonds, to be honest. I don't know why the word
call it whatever you want to call it. Corona bonds, Euro bonds, common debt, recovery funds, whatever you want to call it.
You don't see it in the media anymore. Huh? Corona bonds, Euro bonds, the wording is gone because it's somehow understood that it's toxic. It won't get us anywhere, so we don't call it. Now it's called common debt issuing, whatever, whatever you want to call it. But
a more boring name.
It's like new generation you. Which is a beautiful name, though. We have to.
Beautiful, yeah. But I mean, the interesting thing is that she said, not in word by word, but something like "over my dead body,"
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
And then, I mean, back then, I remember Hollande and trying to push her to build a growth package. So already back then, but she wouldn't even think about it. Austerity, and this time around, I mean, like the impact is really. It's a structural impact everywhere across the EU. So it's a bit different, and it leads to, and it's much stronger, obviously. And this time the businesses went to, I think, Merkel very early and said, look, we will really have a huge problem in Germany if we don't somehow soften the slump. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a huge factor, and maybe also because she knows it can be a legacy thing, like she's really now on her way out.
And this connects a lot to what Reinier was saying, because I was thinking about one fact. Reinier's government, like your country, has elections next year, and the ruling party will probably run again, while this is not the case for America on the other side. So she won't have any other elections to be running for. And this is the moment for her to make what is right without having to worry necessarily about her electoral return. So, I mean, how do you guys, Reinier, do you think it's going to also play out?
Just one note on this, Reinier, and then you can go, because, I mean, the interesting thing is that she got her own party behind this. And with her coalition partner, from the Social Democrats, they are anyways more open for that. But like the whole CDU leadership is supporting her on this. She did quite a good job of building a coalition on this. Sorry, Reinier.
Nice. Well, I was actually lost in in a train of thought. So could you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah, I was just thinking, is it possible that your people are gonna understand that what your government is doing right now, like building up an anti-European narrative to play in favor of its own party for the next elections, it's not actually what it's good for the country itself, but it's just
it is
what
very
it's
short-sighted.
Yeah,
it's very short-sighted. It shows a lack of knowledge of history and also a lack of vision for the future. And I think
can I defend the
yes.
Dutch? Yeah.
Yes,
please.
How do I best say this? We have political priorities involved, and if there's a new spending program happening in the European Parliament, I want to ensure that, or in the EU, that I'm fighting for these priorities to happen. And then, if the money is spent, I would love to see that the money is spent in a useful kind of way, and that this is followed up. And in its current form, even though I fully and 100% agree that we need this program now and we need the money to be spent to help people and actually, soften the downward slump, the EU is still not able to fully set first the priorities on how the money is spent. It's very much driven by member states if you look at the current process. And second, we are not fully able yet to say, look, there's a problem. I don't know, let's pick, or, Hungary, for example. There's a problem of how the contracts are being handed out and to whom they're being handed out and how this is done.
That can make me angry.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think we have, there is some truth in the fact that you want to ensure that money is spent usefully. So now we have common debt. Yeah. Hopefully this will happen. And I'm definitely supporting this. But we should also be able to commonly decide on how the money is spent and ensure that it's spent correctly. And I think everybody agrees, like every citizen and like everybody would agree on this, even if you had a household, like that. Yeah, if you borrow together, that you decide together on how it's spent. And this is not yet the case. And so,
the thing is that the main narrative is often that it will be just here you have it, do whatever you want with it, and they're just gonna spend money on beer. I don't know, just to give an example. But that's actually not the case, because it still has it's still often tied to a budget which has to be approved by the European Parliament, by the Council. So it's not as if it's just randomly spent and it evaporates somewhere.
That's true.
Yeah, and also, I mean, one thing is talking about conditionalities, right? And I completely agree that it's a common budget. You need to have common guidelines on how this money are going to be spent. And we have, from the new project, from the new plan, a macro idea on how to spend this money, right? Digitalization, green transition. And then the Commission is giving, guidelines to the single governments on health, a jurisdiction system, justice system, education, and others. I agree with you also that maybe those kind of guidelines should be stricter, but then it's also the principles of subsidiarity that comes in, because you should actually use those money according to where the state needs it.
Just to jump in there, I don't think it should be stricter. Because that's a bit like, a simplistic view that I think somehow also in Germany, these very strict, we should be very strict on how we send them. No, I only say that we should be democratically deciding how we want to spend European money as European citizens. That's basically.
Yeah, and with this I agree. And I also agree with the problem with the Frugal Four, I don't think it's about necessarily the conditionalities and how this money is going to be spent, because I think that, this macro area that have been given by the Commission can be widely accepted. I mean, we're talking about the green transition, which are things that finally we get to do thanks to the European Union. But then there's like the other issue of how much money, under which form, and according to which priorities those happen. Like this hits the nail, right? So we've been given 82 billion in grants and 91 billion in loan. We've been proposed to be given, right? And I think the amount, the way in which those money are going to be given, and the way in which we are receiving the money, so why we're receiving the money, these are the questions that are going to be, hard to tackle, not necessarily how.
Yeah, and that's something that's why I need this beer because I read the regulation today for the biggest instrument within the package. Yeah, it's called the RRF, the Resilience and Recovery.
What does it come in an email or in a big booklet or how?
It's a PDF. It's a PDF. You get it. I mean, honestly, it's very elegantly written. This time it's shorter.
Okay.
But
shorter it means what?
Okay, so the original, so the predecessor that I worked on, the RSP, was, I don't know how many pages. I would have like 50, 60, 70 pages. I actually forgot. This one is, I think, I don't know, 30 pages or something. But it refers to a lot of documents that you need to be aware of. So like it's a big, a puzzle. But maybe just to like give an example for this instrument, which I think is supposed to give out 560 billion, like a huge amount of money. And I mean, as you just gave the example for Italy, I think in the end it amounts to 5% of Italian GDP or whatever. That should be. Yeah. So this is, I mean, the amount of money is big. Obviously, I think we would have needed more, and that's also the Parliament's position. But it's a lot. So the scope of what the money can be used for is defined in this document. And you can see there's the European semester, which is basically like very broad recommendations of how to improve your economy, more from a economic kind of standpoint rather than crisis resilience building or something like that, or recovery. And then some broad language on digital, some broad language on green, and so I think we agree generally with the priorities, but it's very, very broad. And I mean, that basically means that countries can use it, I think, for almost anything they want. And that's where, and it's not decided really by the European Parliament, or there's no influence by the European Parliament per year on how the money is spent. And so that's where it gets a bit complicated for me, because I think obviously the countries should themselves be able to set their priorities, but since it's European money, and actually real European money, because we borrow it all together, the European level should also decide a bit on the priorities of how it's spent. And that's just a political thing. And then again, in my view, if you don't, like if all the countries don't, or the citizens don't agree how we spend the money, or how we broadly say that we want to spend it more digital, more green or whatever, then we should be able to diselect whoever decided that. But I think
we currently can't.
Yeah, we currently can't. But I think it's also difficult to just say, here's money, take it for whatever you want to do on the national level. And it's also not like that. So I mean, I don't want to oversimplify, but I'm taking a bit the Dutch position to or like the position of someone who says, if we have common debt issuance, we should also decide together on how to use the money.
Yeah, that's what I always said. If you want to have further integration of Europe, it needs to go hand in hand with creating that European democracy.
Absolutely.
Instead of just.
But I'm still happy that we did. Like, I mean, this yesterday happened. Yeah, I mean, I think it's
it's a good sign.
And exactly. That's exactly what I was about to say. In a closing note, like, I think that if you want to see the positive side of this crisis, I know it sounds like I don't know whether it sounds right, but if you want to see the bright side, I don't think that the European Union would have been able to make such a huge step without such kind of crisis. We all know it. We were born out of a political conundrum for the European Union, right? We were stuck as European Union. We would not move forward, not move backward. And if you think about it, I mean, just think about February. When this whole crisis started, our head of states and governments were actually fighting on the 0.01% of the multi-annual financial framework and the budget, the European Union budget. And in in like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 750 billion euros proposal for a recovery plan for the entire European Union. I mean, we made huge steps, and like the kind of response that I had from the German government, from the French government, even from my government, in terms of building something together, regardless of the frugal four, hearing Macron talking about caring of the countries that were hit the most by this crisis. And he mentioned Italy, and he mentioned tourism as the countries and sectors that were going to be hit the most. Really made me feel like we are a union and there's no way we can move forward. So where do you guys, this is my question for you, where do you guys think we going to go after this crisis? If this plan is accepted and we will have to move forward as a European Union, how is going to our future look like?
It depends on the people that are watching. What will you do? Because I firmly believe that it is responsibility of each and every citizen to speak up on what they want it to be. And I think it will depend on which side organizes themselves the best. What I hope for is that we will eventually have a treaty change and that we can have this debate and move the European Union in a direction that most people want. The direction I want is way more integration and one Europe with one democracy. But whether it will be that or disintegration depends on how people behave. So I would encourage everybody to become part of Volt if you're not already. But if you disagree with us, become part of another political organization and try to push them forward.
Yeah, I mean, as I said as well, I think like it's a huge breakthrough moment that we would issue debt together as the European Union and spend it on things that we believe are important to save actually people's jobs and help people survive these difficult times. I think is
finally raise taxes on tech.
This is really positive. So that I think makes me very happy. And I mean, Macron and Merkel actually said it in their statement as well. We need to now see why we didn't react fast enough when it came to health. We need to see why we weren't able to act faster and maybe even bigger on the economic response. And that means that we need to look at our decision-making structures. And that means that we have an honest discussion about what we want the EU to look like, and that we don't rely on 27 governments somehow trying to find an agreement where some are put in the corner as the frugal four and some are put in the corner as the spending seven. I don't know, whatever you want to call them, but that you have a democratic body like the parliament overseeing a democratic government, democratically elected government, and that we stop building national narratives, but rather have real political discussions about what's needed. I think that's for me.
Because while we are in that national narrative, I mean, all these numbers are so abstract and all these billions, I can't even grasp how much that is. But yesterday I was having, I ate with a friend and we were having a beer with some friends, and one of them just lost their job due to Corona. They had this innovative startup that supplied a lot of different herbs and spices to all these restaurants and stuff, and all the business was closed. And that before Corona crisis promising startup is now bankrupt and people are at home without a job. And so this has actual real life impact on so many people. And I think it's good to highlight that as well, because sometimes in these discussions you're like, okay, so why are we doing this? And it's us against them. And it's actually about real people and their livelihoods.
Yeah.
That's a very beautiful last word, Reinier. we're way over time, but
we're way over time. But I enjoyed talking to you a lot. Thanks.
We looked to it again. I mean, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many details I can bore you with still about this, how this program is set up and how the funding would work in the 4-year recovery and resilience plans, blah blah. So I mean, I think we definitely deserve.
I need a beer for that, but then we can get back to it if you want.
Not today, but another time if you want. Thanks a lot. It was really,
Thanks a lot, guys.
Really nice.
Thank you too. Have a good evening.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody.